There are moments in life when your heart whispers what your mouth cannot say. Moments when the weight on your shoulders feels too heavy to carry, and all you can manage is a trembling, "God, I need you." If you've ever prayed through tears, through silence, or through nights that felt endless, this message is for you, because heaven does not ignore a praying heart, not yours, not ever. There is a kind of prayer that refuses to break, a prayer that rises even when you feel empty, a prayer that holds on when everything around you is telling you to let go. This is the prayer that moves heaven, not the polished words, not perfect phrases, but the cry that comes from the depth of your spirit. When you pray until heaven answers, you aren't begging. You're believing. You're standing on promises, not emotions. You're declaring that God's faithfulness is louder than your storm. Every whispered, "Lord, I trust you," builds a bridge between your need and His provision. Yes, there will be moments when it seems like nothing is happening, but in the unseen, God is working. In the silence, He is shifting things in your favor. In the waiting, He is strengthening you. Prayer is not a duty. It is a lifeline. It's the place where your weakness meets His power, where your questions meet His wisdom, where your fear meets His peace. So pray again. Pray boldly. Pray with the expectation that heaven hears you the first time and moves every time. Your answer may not come the way you imagined, but it will come, because God never ignores the cry of a persistent, faith-filled heart. Heaven answers those who refuse to stop asking, seeking, and knocking. The cry of a broken heart reaches heaven faster than words because it rises from a place too deep to fake, too raw to polish, and too honest to hide. When a heart shatters, the pieces create a sound that only God can interpret, an unspoken language that bypasses the mind and flows straight from the spirit. In those moments when you cannot articulate what hurts, when pain steals your vocabulary and tears become your sentences, heaven is not distanced, it is drawn in. God is not moved by eloquence, He is moved by sincerity. A whispered plea, a trembling breath, a silent ache. These carry weight in the spiritual realm. They carry a purity that words sometimes dilute. There are times when life hits so hard that your prayers no longer feel like prayers, they feel like breathing. But even that breathing, even that trembling, is heard by God. The cry of a wounded heart does not need structure or sound. It is already understood, already felt, already held. His heaven is not listening for volume, it's listening for truth. A broken heart cries differently than a mouth speaks. It carries history, pain, hope, loss, longing, and a desperate desire for healing, all woven together in one spiritual exhale. When you try to put deep pain into words, language often fails. But the Spirit has no limitations. The Spirit can express what the tongue cannot. That's why people often feel God closest in their most shattered seasons, not because they prayed better, but because they prayed from a place where everything was stripped away except their need for Him. In those moments, your vulnerability becomes your offering, your tears become your prayer, your silence becomes your worship. Nothing hidden, nothing rehearsed, nothing filtered. Heaven responds quickly to that kind of authenticity because it is the very essence of spiritual connection. When your heart cries, it creates an open door, an unguarded pathway, where divine comfort, clarity, and strength can flow freely. The broken places become sacred places. There is also a special power in the cry that comes from surrender. A broken heart is not always a sign of defeat. Sometimes it is the beginning of surrender. When you finally reach the point where you stop pretending to be strong, heaven can finally release the strength you truly need. Sometimes the greatest healing begins the moment you let yourself feel what you've been avoiding. The cry of surrender says, "I cannot fix this. I cannot carry this. I cannot find my own way through this." And that honesty becomes the invitation God has been waiting for. It is in surrender that faith becomes real, not the faith that tries to impress, but the faith that simply leans. A heart that cries out acknowledges its limits, and heaven responds by revealing God's limitless power. Your weakness doesn't push God away, it pulls him closer. Your brokenness does not disqualify you, it prepares you for deeper connection. When the heart cries honestly, heaven answers compassionately. And in the depth of brokenness, something extraordinary happens. Sensitivity to God becomes heightened. Pain sharpens spiritual awareness. Tears clear the spiritual vision. The distractions that once filled the heart fall silent, and suddenly God's presence becomes more noticeable than ever before. Many breakthroughs come in seasons of heartbreak, not because the pain itself is powerful, but because pain removes the noise. You hear God in ways you couldn't before. You feel his closeness in ways you never recognized when life was stable. The cry of a broken heart often becomes the birthplace of divine encounters, moments when God whispers into wounds, when he steadies trembling hands, when he lifts the soul from the weight of sorrow. The cry becomes the bridge from despair to reassurance, from fear to peace, from confusion to clarity. Heaven draws near to the brokenhearted, not out of pity, but out of covenant. Your tears are not unnoticed. They are gathered, valued, and responded to. Even more, the cry of a broken heart creates intimacy with God that no language could ever replicate. Words can sometimes stay on the surface, but a broken heart exposes the deepest layers of the soul. In those depths, God doesn't just listen, he heals. He doesn't just observe, he restores. He doesn't just comfort, he transforms. The cry from your spirit becomes the raw material God uses to rebuild what life tried to destroy. And though the pain may feel overwhelming, the cry becomes the seed of strength, resilience, faith, and spiritual authority. A broken heart may not feel powerful, but in heaven's eyes, it carries unmatched spiritual weight. This cry, this deep, unfiltered, sacred cry, is never ignored. It travels faster than words, deeper than phrases, and higher than any polished prayer. Because heaven recognizes the voice of a heart that is seeking, longing, reaching, and heaven always responds. Faithful persistence opens doors that strength alone cannot, because persistence is not about force. It is about endurance, trust, and refusal to surrender when circumstances scream that nothing is changing. Strength can push for a moment, but persistence keeps moving when strength runs out. There are battles where physical effort, emotional effort, or even intellectual effort cannot break through, because the breakthrough you need is spiritual. Persistence is the commitment to keep knocking even when the door seems locked, to keep praying even when heaven feels silent, and to keep believing even when every natural sign suggests you should give up. It is the quiet decision that says, I will not stop until what God promised becomes what I see. Persistence carries the weight of faith, not human ability. It is powered by conviction rather than comfort, by vision rather than immediate results. When you choose persistence over giving up, you align yourself with heaven's timing, heaven's process, and heaven's power. Persistence is not the loud, dramatic kind of strength people admire. It is the hidden strength of someone who wakes up day after day and decides to trust again, try again, believe again. Strength alone exhausts quickly, but persistence fuels itself with purpose. You persist not because it feels easy, but because your spirit refuses to surrender what God placed in your heart. Many people fail not for lack of strength, but for lack of staying power. Faithful persistence means you stay when others walk away. You hold on when others release. You push through when others say it is pointless. Heaven responds to persistence because persistence is evidence of faith. It proves you believe the outcome is worth the waiting. It proves you trust the one who holds the outcome. And when you combine persistence with unwavering faith, you activate a spiritual force that begins to move mountains that human strength could never touch. There are doors that will never open through effort, talent, intelligence, or connections, but they will swing wide for the one who refuses to stop knocking. Persistence unlocks things that seem impossible, not because the door suddenly becomes easy, but because persistence changes you while you wait. It strengthens your character, sharpens your focus, and prepares you to carry what you are praying for. Sometimes the door is not locked, Sometimes you are still being built. Strength tries to force the door open prematurely, but persistence trusts the process. It recognizes that preparation is not punishment. It understands that delay is not denial. Heaven often waits for persistence to be proven before releasing the breakthrough, because persistence shows that your faith is anchored, not conditional. It shows that your trust remains steady, whether the answer comes quickly or slowly. And when heaven sees persistence, it sees maturity, it sees readiness, it sees a heart willing to walk by faith, not sight. That is when doors begin to open effortlessly, doors that human hands could never pry open. Faithful persistence also carries a spiritual authority that strength alone cannot produce. Strength is often rooted in self-reliance, but persistence is built on surrender. The one who persists learns to lean on God rather than self. They learn to pray deeper, stand firmer, and expect more. Persistence transforms your inner life. It tests your motives, refines your desires, and aligns your heart with God's will. When you persist, you begin to understand that breakthrough is not just about what you receive, but about who you become while waiting. You begin to see delays not as obstacles, but as divine classrooms. You begin to treat every setback as a step forward in disguise. Persistence gives heaven legal permission to intervene because it demonstrates your refusal to quit. It demonstrates that you are in agreement with God's promise. Agreement is powerful. It opens doors no earthly strength can open, and when your spirit stays in agreement long enough, heaven moves in ways impossible for human effort. In the end, faithful persistence reveals a truth that strength alone never can. Breakthroughs belong to the consistent, not the powerful. The reward of persistence is not only the open door, but the transformed heart that walks through it. A person who persists becomes unshakable, unmoved by storms, unwavering in trial, and unstoppable in faith. They understand that every not yet carries purpose. They understand that every delay builds spiritual muscles. They understand that their persistence is not ignored, but recorded, honored, and answered in heaven's perfect timing. Strength can make you look capable, but persistence makes you victorious. Strength may help you start, but persistence ensures you finish. And it is the finisher, not the starter, who walks through the doors that strength alone could never open. One of many cult works in silence, but his results are never quiet because the deepest moves of heaven rarely announce themselves while they are forming. When God is preparing something significant in your life, he often does it in seasons where nothing seems to be happening on the surface. The silence is not emptiness. It is construction. It is the space where God shifts pieces you cannot see and aligns opportunities you aren't aware of. Silence becomes sacred when you realize it is not abandonment but preparation. Many people mistake God's quietness for distance, but in reality, some of the greatest breakthroughs begin in seasons when heaven seems mute. God uses the stillness to mature your faith, to quiet your fears, and to build inner strength that noise would never allow. It's in this silence that you learn to trust him beyond what your eyes can see. And though the silence can feel heavy, heaven is never inactive. The quiet seasons are where foundations are poured and spiritual roots deepen. God works quietly so that when the blessing finally arrives, there will be no doubt it was his hand that orchestrated every detail. In the silent seasons, God develops parts of you that would never grow during times of noise and activity. Silence forces you inward, drawing you to examine your heart, your motives, and your foundation. Sometimes God is not withholding answers. He is building capacity. He is stretching your faith so you can carry what is about to release. Silence is a place of shaping where pride is humbled and your dependence on him becomes real rather than theoretical. You may feel overlooked, but heaven is intentionally focused on you. God is reinforcing your spirit, strengthening your endurance, and expanding your understanding of his character. The silent season removes distractions, so you become more aware of the whispers of His Spirit. You may not hear thunder, but you begin to sense direction. You may not see movement, but you grow in peace. Silence becomes the furnace where character is purified, and faith becomes unshakable. What feels like waiting is actually divine preparation. God hides His work because some transformations cannot happen in public. They need the safety of silence. There is something powerful about the way God moves unseen. Just like seeds grow beneath the soil, so does every promise God plants in your life. You may not see evidence immediately, but silence never means inactivity. God is orchestrating connections, opening paths, softening hearts, and positioning resources long before you see the outcome. While you think nothing is changing, everything is shifting in your favor. Silent seasons teach you patience, but they also teach you spiritual vision, learning to trust what God is doing even when your senses cannot detect it. In this hidden work, God protects you from premature exposure. He doesn't want you stepping into blessings you're not yet prepared to sustain. His silence shields you from rushing, forcing you to wait until the moment is right. Heaven's timing is never accidental. The work He does behind the scenes is intentional, strategic, and deeply personal. And when God moves quietly, it is often because He is preparing something too powerful to reveal too soon. Silence is the envelope that protects the miracle until it is fully ready to emerge. Then comes the moment when God reveals what He has been doing in the quiet, and the results are anything but silent. When God finishes His hidden work, the breakthrough speaks loudly. Closed doors open with undeniable clarity. Impossible situations shift suddenly. What was held back for years is released in a moment. This is why His results are never quiet, because when God moves, it carries a weight that cannot be ignored. The blessings that come out of silence carry the fingerprints of heaven. People notice the change in your life. They notice the elevation, the restoration, the healing, the turnaround. What once looked stagnant becomes a testimony that draws attention not to your strength, but to God's faithfulness. His results shake atmospheres, inspire faith, ignite hope, and silence the doubts that grew in the waiting. The quiet seasons end with loud evidence, evidence so clear that no person, no circumstance, and no opposition can deny who made it happen. God's outcomes are loud because they are meant to reveal His glory, not your efforts. And when the results finally surface, they often come with a magnitude that far exceeds the weight of the silence that preceded them. God compensates for the quiet seasons with results that overflow, restore, and redeem time lost. The silence becomes meaningful because it explains the size of the miracle. You begin to understand why the wait was long, why the path was lonely, why the answers were delayed. In hindsight, silence becomes revelation. You realize God was not withholding, He was perfecting. He was arranging things better than you would have dared to ask for, and the impact of His work becomes impossible to ignore. Doors that you thought were permanently shut swing open. Relationships you thought were broken beyond repair mend in unexpected ways. Opportunities that seemed unreachable fall into place effortlessly. His results create a sound of testimony, victory, and new beginnings, not because you forced anything, but because God works quietly until the appointed moment when His blessing must be seen, must be known, and must be undeniable. Silence was the setup, and the result is the revelation. Prayer is where your weakness meets God's strength, because it is the one place where you never have to pretend, perform, or prove anything. In prayer, the fragile parts of you, your fears, your failures, your insecurities, are not flaws to God, but invitations. When you come to Him drained, empty, and unsure, heaven does not see your weakness as a burden, but as a bridge. Prayer becomes the meeting point where your limitations collide with His limitless power. You don't need to come with strength you do not have. You need only to come honestly. God is not impressed by human strength, but He is deeply moved by human surrender. When you kneel with trembling hands and a tired spirit, you are positioning yourself to receive a strength beyond anything your own willpower could produce. Weakness in prayer is not a disadvantage. It is the beginning of divine reinforcement. When you come to God honestly, heaven comes to you powerfully. In moments when life drains you and the weight becomes too heavy to carry, prayer becomes the lifeline that pulls you back into hope. Your weakness may make you feel unqualified, but in prayer it becomes the very reason God steps in. It is often when you run out of strength that you finally discover His. When your confidence shakes, God's assurance holds. When your thoughts scatter, His wisdom gathers you. When your emotions overwhelm, His peace anchors. Prayer allows you to bring every broken piece, every doubt, every fear, every wound, and place it into hands that are not intimidated by your condition. You don't have to be strong to approach God. You simply have to be willing. Prayer transforms your vulnerability into connection, your exhaustion into renewal, and your emptiness into a space God can fill. The moment you admit, "I can," heaven whispers back, "But I can." There is a depth of strength available in prayer that human effort can never unlock. Trying to force your way through life with your own strength will eventually drain you, but surrendering in prayer will sustain you. True strength isn't born from striving, it's born from yielding. When you release your grip, God tightens His. When you stop trying to control everything, God begins to align everything. Prayer is the environment where divine exchange happens. You give God your worry, He gives you peace. You give Him your weakness, He gives you courage. You give Him your confusion, He gives you direction. And this exchange is not symbolic, it is transformational. People look back after seasons of prayer and say, "I don't know how I got through that." But the truth is, they didn't get through it. God carried them. Prayer didn't remove weakness. It replaces weakness with supernatural strength, the kind that doesn't make sense except that God was involved. In the quietness of prayer, God strengthens you in ways you often do not recognize at first. You may rise from prayer without fireworks or emotional intensity, yet something inside has shifted. It might be subtle, but it is real. Your shoulders feel lighter, your heart steadier, your mind clearer. Strength from God is not always loud. Sometimes it is the gentle inner assurance that you are not alone, not abandoned, not fighting in your own power. Prayer plants invisible seeds that grow into visible breakthroughs. It strengthens you for battles you haven't fought yet, prepares you for doors you haven't walked through yet, and equips you for storms you don't even know are coming. God's strength in you may begin quietly, but it becomes evident when life pressures rise. Prayer fills you with a strength that withstands storms, endures trials, pushes through valleys, and refuses to quit. Prayer remains the place where your weakness becomes the canvas for God's strength to be displayed. When you pray, you step into a divine partnership in which God supplies what you lack. You may bring brokenness, but He brings restoration. You may bring confusion, but He brings clarity. You may bring fear, but He brings boldness. In prayer, God does not ask for perfection. He asks for truth. And when you come truthfully, even in weakness, He meets you wholly, powerfully, and faithfully. Your weakness is never the end of the story. When prayer enters the scene, it is the moment God begins writing strength into your spirit. Prayer doesn't just strengthen you for the moment. It strengthens who you are becoming. It turns fragile hearts into resilient ones, weary souls into enduring ones, and trembling hands into lifted ones. It is the sacred ground where your humanity touches His divinity, and your weakness becomes the very place His strength is revealed. In the end, every part of your journey with God comes down to one simple truth. Heaven hears you more deeply than you realize. The cries of your heart, the quiet persistence in your spirit, the silent seasons where you feel unseen, and the moments where you come trembling in weakness, all of it becomes part of a divine conversation that God never ignores. Every tear whispered in prayer, every breath taken in faith, every moment you choose to hold on instead of giving up is shaping a breakthrough you may not see yet, but heaven has already begun. You were never meant to rely solely on your own strength. You were created to lean on a power greater than anything you face. Prayer is not just what you say, it is who you become when you step into the presence of God with honesty, vulnerability, and expectation. As you continue this journey, remember that persistence is not wasted, silence is not abandonment, and weakness is not failure. These are the places where God does his greatest work. The breakthroughs you've been praying for, the answers you've been waiting on, the doors you've been pushing against, all are being shaped in ways your eyes cannot yet see. Sometimes God prepares the answer before he reveals it. Sometimes he prepares you before he sends it. Either way, the process is purposeful and the outcome is certain. Heaven responds to hearts that refuse to quit, spirits that refuse to lose hope, and faith that refuses to be silent. Walk forward with confidence, knowing that your prayers matter, your persistence has power, and your heart is fully known by God. Thank you for listening. Stay encouraged, and God bless you abundantly.